What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick, aka That Music Junkie, and I wanted to talk to you about something. So, I wrote and posted an article called The 20 Albums You Should Have in Your Collection. And I wrote and posted that article about 7 years ago. So, I always wanted to do that as a series, and I just never got around to continuing it, and so that's what we're doing today. I'm going to continue the series. Now, this video, as you've gathered from the title, is not 20 albums you should have in your library, but in fact 10, because 20 would be a long video, and I don't feel like making a long video, at least not at this time. But I plan on, like I said, making this a sort of ongoing series, more like a micro series, because let's be honest, there's so many albums. It's hard to narrow it down. Now, before I get started, I do want to preface this with, this is not a top 10, nor was that article a top 20. This isn't necessarily the best albums of all time or anything. I mean, there's some classic albums on that list as well as this one, but rather albums I feel, as a music lover and avid vinyl collector myself, are quintessential to anyone's collection. So this may seem like a best of. I want to say right out the gate, there's no ranking. I wrote these down as they came to me. They are in no particular order, so don't take the order of these as gospel, because that's not what it is. You'll have to forgive me if I keep looking off camera, because the camera's here, but I'm over here, so it's... Never mind. First off, number 10, Dummy by Portishead. This album was released way back in 1994, if you can believe it was. That's 28 years ago. Oh, that pains me to say. But yeah, 28 years ago. Is by and far one of the best trip-hop albums ever, in my humble opinion. And of course you still have enduring acts like Massive Attack, which is a huge trip-hop act that continues to this day, I think. Don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. But Portishead, in the mid-90s, when they dropped this, kind of put the genre on the map. And they have 3 albums in total, a self-titled one, Dummy, and Third, all of which are just fantastic. They also have a live album, which is... anything that this band does is fantastic. And if you are familiar with this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Beginning to end, there's no skips. Like, this album is great. And if you're not familiar with this particular album, I would encourage you, I think almost out of every album on that I'm going to list, I would say check this one out first, because it's so good. I actually remember the first time I heard it, I was still living in Lancaster, California, and I was hanging out with a good friend of mine, and she was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of Portishead?" And I'm like, "No, what is that? What is that?" Because she was a barista at the time, so I'm like, "Is that like a coffee drink that I'm not familiar with? It's Starbucks making new sizes, making up words again." She said, "No, it's trip hop." And I'm like, "You mean hip hop?" She said, "No, trip hop." I don't know what this was. Now, granted, this is like 2000. Oh gosh, I want to say 2012, I think. So while I knew, a fair share about music at that time, and my interest was growing and growing, I wasn't necessarily the well-versed music junkie you see before you today. I was like, "No, what's that?" And she's like, "It's kind of like this weird mix of like hip hop beats, but with like electronic, like ambient electronic. So I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I've always been down to discover new stuff. So yeah, I'm like, play it. And from the first time she played that album, I fell in love. And I own it digitally, I own it in CD, and I recently got it on vinyl. It's great, and I'm very thankful for my for my friend for introducing it to me. Shout out to Melissa if you're watching this. It's a good time. I would recommend checking it out. Next up, we have Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. It was Henry Rollins who said that this album ranks among one of the best debut albums of all time. Now, I'm paraphrasing that quote, of course, because I don't remember the exact words that Mr. Rollins said.
It is a stunning debut album, as good as any debut album of any band that has ever existed.
But the meaning is the same. Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures is unlike anything else I had ever heard. And unlike anything else, really, that came before it or even after it. I mean, you have some bands that imitate that, and I think in a way one of my personal favorite modern day bands, Interpol, kind of channels Joy Division, at least in their earlier stuff, but no one comes close. From that opening track of Disorder, which is my favorite Joy Division song, by the way, all the way through, it's a whole experience listening to that album. That album will create a deep love of Joy Division, as Henry Rollins says. It's really a shame we only got 2 actual studio albums out of them before Ian sadly left us, but I can't tell you how many times I've revisited Unknown Pleasures. It's so good. And it's definitely like I previously said, it's an experience. A lot of Joy Division, maybe you don't know this, but Joy Division kind of got its start as a punk band. But lead singer Ian Curtis has a background of a spoken word poet. So he introduced that to this punk element, but they committed the cardinal sin of punk at the time, this is the late 70s, of adding a synthesizer, which null and voided any punk kind of label that they might have had, and I think contributed to the creation and rise of post-punk. If you're not familiar with the genre of post-punk, it was really popular in the 80s. Alongside your hair metal, your glam metal, whatever, there was also acts like The Smiths, The Cure, Susie and the Banshee, My Bloody Valentine, stuff like that. That's all post-punk, and I feel like Joy Division kind of helped usher that in with this album. As you can tell, I'm not doing a deep dive into each one because I didn't want to do a full review of each album, like a full written/spoken review, because again, that would be a very long video, and we're trying to kind of streamline this. Maybe at some point I'll do a deep dive as like a retro review, kind of like what I'm doing with my high school/junior high soundtrack video series that I'm doing, which if you haven't watched, check that out. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. Going down memory road has been a treat, so to say. Next up, we are diving into the realm of rap and hip-hop with Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. That might seem as a random pick for me, as I don't necessarily write too much about rap and hip-hop over on thatmusicjunkie.com. I did kind of post a review of Gunna's Drip Season Forever album earlier this year. But the reason I don't really talk too much about rap and hip-hop is because as a listener myself, I'm relatively new to those genres, and I don't feel that I'm well enough versed in them to talk about them with any sort of authority. And I'd rather do a genre or an artist justice by speaking only to things that I really know. Because then you're just making, I don't know, then it just seems weird and silly and almost inauthentic. And I don't want that. I've always strived for authenticity since I launched this whole thing. But I do want to say that Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, of all the hip-hop and rap albums I have listened to, which is, it's getting there, it's growing, this one stands out as probably one of my favorites, right up there with his album Damn. They're both, I'm sold on Kendrick Lamar. I mean, I'm a West Coast kid myself, so while I'll never know, I can't necessarily relate to any of the things that he discusses per se, I can enjoy the music nonetheless. And I think it's a testament to Kendrick's musicality that he created this album, which has awesome tracks like I and Alright and King Kunta, which are all great songs. David Bowie actually attributed inspiration for his final studio album Black Star. He attributed To Pimp a Butterfly as some inspiration towards that, which I thought was crazy, and that's what kind of led me to check it out in the first place. I mean, if friggin' David Bowie is saying like, hey, this album's great, and it inspired an awesome album in Black Star, which is an emotional roller coaster if you've never listened to it. But so that's what made me check it out, and it kind of made me a Kendrick Lamar fan. I like all his stuff. Almost went with Damn, but I think this one and possibly Good Kid, Mad City, they're right up there with the must includes. And that's, like I said at the beginning of this video, it's not a best of. This is just albums I feel as a music collector should be in your collection, be it vinyl, CD, cassette, doesn't matter. Speaking of David Bowie, my next one is Hunky Dory. Hunky Dory is the third studio album from David Bowie, released in 1971, and this was the beginning of David Bowie becoming David Bowie. His debut album, which is just self-titled, has Space Oddity on it, which is fantastic. It's really about the only standout on it. The follow-up was The Man Who Sold the World, which again, covered by Nirvana in the historic MTV Unplugged session. But Hunky Dory is more of a stripped down approach to an album because it's primarily just him and piano, but there's some of the songs like Changes is on there. It has of course a brass section, but God, that, like I said, I contribute Hunky Dory to the beginning of David Bowie as what he became, because right after that is Ziggy Stardust. What can you say? The rest is history from there. But Hunky Dory has my personal favorite David Bowie song, which is Life on Mars, and it's just a great record. You have Oh You Pretty Things, Life on Mars, Changes, all these classics, these classic songs that endured his entire career, that he played and performed his entire career. It was also his first platinum record, his first certified platinum record. The two before it went gold, but Hunky Dory hit platinum. And immediately after that, like I said, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, or the Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, pardon me, double platinum. Like I said, it was the beginning of Bowie, and the rest is history. Up next, we're making a sharp left turn and going to Aphex Twin. Selected Ambient Works, 85 to 92. Now that sounds like a collection or like a greatest hits, but it's not. It's actually a studio album. And if you're asking me why does it have such a weird game, clearly you're not familiar with Aphex Twin. Familiar with Aphex Twin, Richard D. James is a weird guy. Very interesting, but he's a pioneer in the electronic genre. He was the one who introduced the stutter effect to music, or to electronic music that is used to this day by countless electronic artists. Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park did What's in My Bag on Amoeba Music's YouTube channel, and he brought out Aphex Twin. And honestly, if you've ever watched any of those What's in My Bags, which are like one of my favorite things to watch on YouTube, a lot of people bring out Aphex Twin. Usually it's the Richard D. James album, or it's his Cheetah LP. And I honestly thought about including the Richard D. James album because of that iconic album cover. Iconic in that it's a bit unsettling. But again, it's Aphex Twin. But I decided to go with Selected Ambient Works 85 to 92 because it's like the quintessential Aphex Twin album. It's a great, not only is it a great album, it's a great introduction to Aphex Twin in general. So if you've ever been curious, you're like, hey, I kind of want to get into electronic music, or, you know, I'm into electronic music, but I want to see more of I want to learn more about the beginnings and all that stuff. This is the album for that, I would say. And not necessarily the beginnings, because it came out, you know, well into electronic becoming a thing, but it really helped push it to where it is now. And I think he's very much a pioneer of the genre. Speaking of pioneers, let's talk about Metallica. Now, I know what you're thinking. Metallica, oh, he's going to mention Master of Puppets or the Black Album. No, you're wrong. I'm not going to talk about those two. While the two are really good albums, albeit Black Album is, of course, divisive amongst Metallica fans when it was released, and honestly, a bit of a topic of discussion to this day, you know, depending on the age range of people discussing it. I'm going with Ride the Lightning. Because that's probably the best thrash metal album ever. And that's a strong statement to say because, you know, this album came out in the 80s. That's 40 years ago. That's 40 years ago. And there's been a lot of thrash albums released. There's Megadeth, there's Overkill, there's Anthrax, there's Slayer. Lots of fantastic thrash metal bands with lots of fantastic albums. Ride the Lightning is amazing. I think Ride the Lightning is the best thrash album. You're welcome, if you might disagree with me on that, and honestly, you're welcome to do so. This is what discussions are about. But in my humble opinion, as your friendly neighborhood music junkie, Ride the Lightning stands out as the best thrash metal of all time. I mean, it has classic Metallica tracks like For Whom the Bell Tolls, Trapped Under Ice, Creeping Death, all on Ride the Lightning. It's a great album. Fight me. Don't fight me, I'm a pacifist. But you get what I'm saying. Cliff Burton's bass playing is unreal. If you look up that video of them playing that song live when Cliff was still with us, he does this insane bass solo leading right into it, and it's just, oh my god, it's so good. Next on my list, we're going to do another hard left, going off of Metallica and into The Killers. I'll say that again. The Killers. Now, before anybody starts any flame war in the comment section, or before you throw any shade, we're going to talk about Hot Fuzz. That album's great. Okay? That album is fantastic. The first half was all singles. That's like, it's a dream for any band, even well-established ones that have been around for decades. It's very rare that the whole first half of your album are singles that get radio play to this day. Somebody told me, Smile Like You Mean It, Mr. Brightside. You can't go anywhere without hearing that song. Still. And that album was released in 2004, 18 years ago. And you hear Mr. Brightside and every 98% of my fellow white millennials lose their mind, because like it's a great song. It's catchy. Tyler over at Music Is Win discussed it, and when they play it live, the crowd goes nuts. It also has All These Things That I've Done, which is a great song. I know I sound like a broken record when I say record. I know I sound like a broken record when I say, "Oh, it's a great song," but anybody who knows me knows that I operate under the belief that words have meanings. So I don't use words like hate too often. I don't use words that have such strong inflections unless I sincerely mean them. So, yeah. Believe me when I say I think Hot Fuzz by The Killers should be in your collection because it's a great album. Next up on our list, we have an album from a band who just recently released new music, Yeah Yeah Yeah's Fever to Tell. Another one from the early 2000s, this one coming out in 2003. Anybody who is familiar with this album knows what I'm talking about when I say that this album should be on the list. It has Maps, which is a stellar single and put the band on the map. It has Y Control, which is fun. It has Tick. It has Date with the Night. It has Spin. It has so many great songs. And to come from a three-piece band in this kind of post-punk / post-rock, whatever, alt-rock movement we had in the early 2000s, to come from only a three-piece band out of New York City is amazing, because a lot of bands at that time were 4 or 5 member bands and usually all male. Interpol, Block Party, the Libertines, the Strokes, the Vines. Yeah, I can keep going. Louis XIV. You had this predominantly male-dominated genre, and out comes Yeah Yeah Yeahs, fronted by Karen O, and they just wipe the floor with a lot of these bands. Not to discredit any of those bands, I just recently saw Interpol up in Cincinnati, and they were awesome. It was the second time I saw them. It was fantastic. But we're not talking about Interpol. We're talking about Yeah Yeah Yeahs. I stand by my statement when I say Yeah Yeah Yeahs. It's hard to say that a bunch of times fast, so if it sounds like gibberish at this point, don't hate on me. But I mean, you get what I'm saying though. They like wipe the floor with a bunch of these bands. Yeah Yeah Yeahs is still making music, and a lot of those bands that came out during that time aren't anymore. Granted, we're seeing a weird little revival of this genre with new music this year from Interpol, Editors, and Block Party, all at the same time, which is wild. But Yeah Yeah Yeahs is right there with them, keeping pace. So I think it's really cool that you have a female-led three-piece band hang in this male-dominated genre, but be one of the best in the genre. So good on them. Listen to Fever to Tell. Add it to your collection. It's great. Right now we're going to talk about the most recent album to come out in this list. And that is and this is going to take some people by surprise, but stay with me. Orville Peck, Pony. I bet you did not expect that. A country album. Country is another one of those genres I just don't really talk about. There's a couple of country artists that I like, but the genre as a whole is not my favorite, which is surprising because as I was growing up, especially in my younger years, I'm talking kindergarten, first grade, second grade, my mom, who was from Eastern Kentucky, was like all about country. Brooks and Dunn, Garth Brooks, the Judds. So I think it's funny that I latched on to more of what my dad listened to, Rush, U2 to a degree, and a lot of 80s pop, rock-ish type stuff. Maybe that's because my dad worked so much. I did spend a lot more time with my mom growing up than my dad, because my dad worked a full-time job, so I didn't see him as much. So maybe that's probably why I latched onto his musical likings a little bit more. I don't know. This isn't rational self-analysis time. We're talking about albums you should have in your library. You guys aren't, this isn't a therapy session, so sorry I got a little weird there for a second. But you get what I'm saying. Growing up around a lot of country music, I didn't care. Garth Brooks is cool. I don't like Brooks and Dunn. Nothing against them personally, but I don't like their music. The Judds, rest in peace, Naomi. Winona's a fantastic singer, but again, their music is not my forte, personally. And I'm not hating on anybody who likes country music. If you like country music, you like what you like. That's just how life is. But I mentioned Orville Peck, Pony. I included in this list as albums you should have in your collection because it is a wonderful, wonderful debut album. He's based out of Canada, although I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's actually from South Africa, but resides in Canada. And if you don't know who Orville Peck is, he always wears a mask, so I don't know what his face looks like. And this portion of his face is always covered, but it has tassels down here, so you can see his mouth. Kind of makes sense if you're a singer. You don't really want to block your mouth, and that's his whole shtick. But unlike a lot of modern day country, which is pop and hip hop for some reason, just with southern accents, I don't get it personally, but whatever. Unlike those bands, Orville Peck is more of a throwback to the earlier days of country, in that it's very guitar driven, but acoustic guitar driven. He's got an amazing crooning voice. He hits you hard with that voice. And sure, the album subject matter might be a little on the sadder side, but isn't that what country was initially? A lot of people make that joke, oh, my truck broke down and my dog died, and while he doesn't necessarily sing about that, it's not a happy album per se. Now, it's not gonna make you depressed. I don't think it hasn't made me depressed. I don't think it's not hey, it's not a feel good album. It's okay, man, this is a guy writing. This is a songwriter. This guy's writing from the heart, and it's really cool. And his follow-up LP, Show Pony, is really good. He featured the legendary Shania Twain on it, and earlier this year he released his second studio album, Bronco, which is happier, and he talked about it being happier. So some standout songs are going to be Dead of Night. Roses Are Falling is one of my personal favorites on that album. Queen of the Rodeo, Winds of Change, Turn to Hate. It has some bangers on it. Bangers? Maybe that's not the right word, but it has some good tunes on it. And I think if you're not a country fan, aside from Johnny Cash, which everybody kind of universally agrees, no matter what genre you're into, generally everybody likes Johnny Cash. Aside from Johnny Cash, I think if you're gonna have a country album in your collection, this is the one I would recommend. Before I get to my last pick, I want to do an honorable mention. And here's why. In that original article that I wrote 7 years ago, I mentioned an album from a band that, while I do like the album, and I'm not regretting my choice by any stretch of the imagination, I think I kind of picked that album over this one that I'm about to talk about because I wanted to stand out, be a little bit different. I wanted to do stuff that was unexpected, which I still feel like I've done in this very video, but I think I picked the wrong one. But it was 7 years ago. What can you do? So I'm going to address it now. I added The Bends by Radiohead, which is their second studio album. And it's a good album. And again, I don't necessarily regret adding it, but as I grew to listen to more Radiohead and kind of take them in and develop a deeper appreciation for the band, I want to say that I wish I had added In Rainbows instead. So that's why it's an honorable mention. Radiohead, In Rainbows. Oh boy, that album is something else. I was recently asked by my brother a couple days ago, as of day of recording, who was asked by his wife 10 albums that, like, if you had to pick 10 albums that you could listen to for the rest of your life and that's all you can listen to, what albums would they be? Well, he passed that along to me, and I included In Rainbows because it's so good. That's all I'm gonna say. It's just an honorable mention. I kind of got the little backstory out of the way. I don't really want to do too much of a deep dive on In Rainbows. If you're not as familiar with this album or Radiohead in general, if you're gonna listen to them at all or check them out, or you want to introduce a friend to Radiohead, boy, you got to do this one. And I don't mean boy in the specific gender connotation. I just mean like, oh boy. It's kind of an important differentiation these days. But yeah, In Rainbows, Radiohead. I wish I had included it back then. I'm including it now as an honorable mention. Last up on our list, and maybe I saved the best for last, even though, again, this is not a best of, and these aren't necessarily ranked in any sort of order. These kind of just as they came to me. I'm going to throw another curveball at you, and I guarantee I'm wearing a Ghost t-shirt right now. I've got punk tattoos. My last entry on this list for this video is Whitney Houston's self-titled debut album. Yes, I'll say that again. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston will go down in history as one of the greatest vocalists ever. I mean, sadly, she had her struggles, she had her demons, she had her addictions, and she left us at a relatively early age. But we could have got so much more out of her if she didn't fall victim to addiction. But my God, this album, holy crap. This album came out in 1985, 4 years before I was born. And it's wild to me to think of a time that Whitney Houston wasn't Whitney Houston as we knew her. Or as I knew her. I didn't know her personally, but you know what I'm saying. Whitney Houston was always this huge megastar when I was growing up, and to this day, like I said, one of the greatest vocalists of all time. Stellar Super Bowl performance of the national anthem. And it's wild to think that when she released her debut album, no one knew who she was. And it's just one of those things, if you're around my age or younger, a lot of us, you just know who Whitney Houston is, and it's just weird to think that there was a time where no one knew who Whitney Houston was. So you have this debut album which has Saving All My Love for You on it, which, come on, it's a great song. And How Will I Know, which is a huge hit for her. And it just, right from the get-go, it just catapulted her into superstardom. And like I said, you know, it's, if you're a loved one or struggling with addiction, I can't encourage you enough to please reach out and seek help, because man, how many lives were cut short because of addiction? How many musical greats did we lose to addiction? And it's so sad. You know, I'm not gonna get too mushy on you guys. I'm not gonna get too, you know, I tend to be a little bit more lighthearted, but you know, serious addiction is a serious issue. And like I said, you know, if you or a loved one or anybody you know is struggling, I really encourage you to reach out and get some help. And that's going to do it for my list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did I do a good job? Did I whiff this completely? Do you completely disagree with me? Am I wrong? Am I right? Am I partially right? You may be wrong, but you may be right. I'll spare you my singing. I'm sorry. We won't do that again. But seriously, I had a lot of fun making this. I had a hard time making this list because I'm like, okay, I want to keep it down to 10. How do I keep this down to 10? Which, like I said, my first article of this was 20, and I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. But if you like this, please, you know, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a comment below what you thought of my list. I would love to keep this going as like I said, kind of like a little micro series. And if you want to see more of stuff like this, let me know. I know I already mentioned the magical words that the almighty YouTube algorithm adores, which is like, comment, and subscribe for more content. It really does help me out, but if you can, even more so, share this video with a friend. If you can head on over to Patreon and consider supporting me, that would mean the world. Even if it's just $1, you know, everything helps. And link to the Patreon is in the description below, as well as some of my other links, such as thatmusicjunkie.com and my merch store. Did you know I have a merch store? I have a merch store. You can buy t-shirts and mugs and stickers. That's fun. Stickers are fun. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. My name is Nick, aka That Music Junkie, and I'll see you in the next one.